In a jazz band, players improvise. Each musician contributes something unique, and each player learns something from the other members of the band. And out of that, something beautiful and important, music, emerges. This learning through interactions with others in the band is similar to how learning occurs in civic ecology practices. Only this time the band is the civic ecology stewards, and the music is creating a beautiful place. And learning through interactions with others is called social learning. My Dutch colleague Arjen Vals has distilled 5 principles of social learning. Today you'll learn about these 5 principles and how they unfold in a civic ecology education program that I started called Garden Mosaics. Just to give you a little background, Garden Mosaics is an intergenerational science and action program that takes place in community gardens. Young people, educators, and gardeners work alongside and learn from each other. Often the elder gardeners have been uprooted from rural areas and moved to cities, and they bring with them cultivation practices that reflect their practical knowledge from farming in Laos, Mexico, the former Soviet republics, or simply South Carolina. What does Garden Mosaics have to do with social learning? Arjen Vals' first social learning principle is people learn from each other. The idea is to distinguish learning that happens when groups of people interact, say in a garden, from one-way learning when a professor lectures, like I'm doing now. I remember a Garden Mosaics project in a community garden in Philadelphia with a fence right smack down through the middle. On one side of the fence were elderly Korean immigrants, and on the other side were African American youth in a summer program. Because of a multitude of societal ills, the two groups hadn't taken advantage of the opportunity to learn from each other, and in fact, they weren't eager to do so. When Garden Mosaics encouraged the youth to interview the Korean gardeners to cross that line, the youth learned about some really cool plants that the elderly gardeners were growing, like purple sweet potatoes. Arjen's second social learning principle is, we learn more in groups of people who don't all think alike. In Garden Mosaics, we emphasize learning from the practical knowledge of the gardeners, of plants and cultivation practices, and from scientists. So here's how it works. First, the young people help the elder gardeners in listening to the gardener's stories. If the gardener talks about, say, tomatoes, weeds, interplanting, or insect pests, the educator would then show the youth and the gardener a science page on that topic. So the science pages were created at Cornell based on scientific knowledge, and they complement the practical knowledge of the gardeners. Let me share an example from a youth group's report about a Puerto Rican community gardener in the Bronx named Paco. So the youth wrote, Paco grows tomatoes, green peppers, corn, eggplants, beans, lettuce, and herbs, not only for food, but also as his homemade medicine. When his feet swell up, he soaks them in warm water steeped with mint. He also uses plantain, which most consider to be a weed, to reduce inflammation and help cuts to heal faster. And he's developed some alternatives to using pesticides, like interplanting different types of plants together, which he says confuses the insect pests. So in this situation, once Paco mentions tomatoes, the educator guiding this Garden Mosaics activity would show the youth and Paco the tomatoes science page. She'd do the same for the other plants and science concepts that Paco mentioned, like beans, weeds, interplanting for pest control, and controlling insect pests. Now on to Arjen's third principle. Trust and social cohesion are essential building blocks in the process of learning from people who hold different views. At first, the gardeners didn't always trust that the youth would treat them with respect. Garden Mosaics helped to create a minimum level of trust needed for the young people in Philadelphia to cross that line dividing them from the Korean gardeners, and for the Korean gardeners to feel comfortable inviting the youth into their space and sharing their practical knowledge. And through working together and sharing stories, the youth and elder gardeners built social connections and began to trust each other. Building trust and cohesion is important because it's a prerequisite for Arjen's 2 final principles. The 4th principle is, social learning is a process of collectively coming to understand a situation. And the 5th principle is, social learners help to create the learning process and the solutions to the dilemmas that they face. and thus they're more likely than passive learners to follow up with action. Here I want to take you to a garden in KwaMashu, a township near Durban, South Africa. When I first visited Sandasanke Primary School in KwaMashu, desperately poor unemployed adults were growing vegetables on the school grounds, but they weren't interacting with the school children. Through garden mosaics, the school children began working with the gardeners, and together they came to understand the problems that the gardeners faced. It turned out that earning a small income was the issue on the gardeners' minds. So the youth worked with the gardeners in a form of collective action. According to a report the students and their teachers wrote, we made colorful flyers advertising the gardeners' produce to post at school and in the community. And we created signs to label the plants in the garden for prospective buyers. We wrote letters to local stores alerting them to this new source of vegetables. And we designed price lists for the available items. To summarize, Aryan's work emphasizes social learning as learning from others, learning more when others have diverse perspectives, building trust as a prerequisite for learning, and collectively coming to an understanding and taking action. You can apply these principles to learning in civic ecology practices like community gardening and even in a MOOC. As you try out different learning activities in this MOOC, pay special attention to the discussion boards. Are you learning from students whose experience, knowledge, and perspectives are radically different than your own? I hope you'll think about how the social learning principles are playing out in multiple activities in which you take part, including the civic ecology practice that you choose for your class project.